Happy Wednesday, my friends. It is so good to see you. If you're in the US, happy potential long weekend for all of us. But if you are joining us from outside of the US, like Narana is here, it is midnight. Well, then just greetings. I hope you have some non caffeine in your cup. Coming to you, big hello from Colorado. I am 8,000 feet and it's feeling hard to breathe. So, wherever you are, I hope you are having a much easier time breathing than I currently am. But big hi to Ryan and Giacomo and Raul. If you are just joining us, welcome. We are a really fun bunch here, and I promise we do not bite. So, say hi in the chat. Let us know where you're coming in from. Maybe what is in your cup. If it is a caffeinated beverage, great. If it is non-caffeinated, we still love that too. Hey to Stuart from South Africa, you might win for the farthest. We'll see if you hold that title, but let us know where you're coming in from so we can see if you beat Stuart, although he might be the winner for today. But hey to Jeff and Jim and David, man, it is so good to see everybody here today before the long holiday weekend. Summer is upon us. And so I thought now was the perfect time as we sort of reset. We're halfway through the year as we kind of think going down the pipe, looking at what we have coming up. Are we really being clear? Are we being really intentional about what we are communicating about ourselves and what we want for the rest of the year? It's kind of an important thing. So when I was thinking about who we could bring on to help us with those things, I really couldn't think of anybody better than Wes. As always, I hope you did your Google stalking about Wes before the meeting. If not, and you're joining us live, we will drop in the chat right now. You can quickly do some Google stalking. If you're listening to us later, I got your back, friend. I'll give you a little 411 before Wes hops on with us. You will be so excited to meet Wes because she is such a powerhouse when it comes to all things marketing. And I always think this is a fun fact. What do Seth Godin, the OG in the marketing space, Scott Galloway, NYU extraordinaire and media maven, and Morning Brew all have in common? Well, they have all hired Wes and her expertise to come help them really hone in their marketing message, because Wes at the core is a marketing expert. She has led over 150 launches of Fortune 500 companies, brands, startups, you name it. And she was the co-creator and executive director of Seth Godin's Alt MBA program, which was really sort of the first program in the space it was online learning before online learning was cool. Let's be honest. So she is such a powerhouse when it comes to this space. And so today we are going to dive in all about how you can learn to market yourself and your career and your brand more clearly and effectively, because that is really, if I had to pick what I think Wes's like sweet spot is, that's something that she just does so naturally that all of us are like, help, how do you do that? It would be this. So from wherever you are, Jen in St. Louis or Rachel coming in from New York City today, I hope you'll raise your cup and help me welcome Wes to our coffee chat.
Hello, hello. I will raise my cup here too.
So good to see you. How are you?
Good. How's it going?
So well. I'm so excited you took time to join us. And I'm so excited that everyone can see your plants in the background, because I will also say a fun fact about you. 75 plus plants. You're a plant mama star.
Yes, I'm kind of obsessed. So yeah. These are just
I love you.
Some of the plant babies.
That's a lot of plant babies. You're running a full greenhouse there.
That's the goal. That's the plan.
I love it. Okay, so hopefully everybody did their Google stalking about you before this, but one of the things I didn't mention is that I think that you are the queen when it comes to viral Twitter threads. And this is such a nerdy question, but I want to know, when you write some of these tweets, do you have that spidey sense when you hit send that you're like, this one's going to hit? People are going to sink their teeth into this one?
Yeah, good question. It can be really hard to know what's really going to hit. So I only want to publish things that I can stand behind and feel really proud of. So every thread that I publish is an idea that I believe will help other people, that have helped, that's helped me. And sometimes a thread gets more popular than I expect, and other times I think like people are really going to like this. And, and it's just kind of a lukewarm response. So it can be kind of hard to tell, but the baseline is I'll publish it if I feel like this is going to help someone and it's helped me.
Well, and so much of what you publish, whether it is on Twitter or on your blog or in your newsletters, I mean, they help so many people. And I'm curious, do you get that sort of instant response? Are people writing back saying, oh my gosh, this was so helpful? Or do you just kind of put it out there and you're like, I hope this hits somewhere, wherever it goes?
One of my favorite things about Twitter is the fast feedback loop. So I love
Yes.
hearing if people are resonating with a thread, if they disagree with certain parts, if there are certain parts that they're like, yes, like that, that specifically is spot on. Yeah, I love that fast feedback loop. It's very gratifying, and I love that data. Of what is really resonating with people that I can do more of or might want to dive deeper into.
Well, and I feel like what is so unique about what you have been able to do is I feel like when you write, it's so distilled. You don't have the extra fluffy words. You don't have a ton of the run on sentences. And I'm curious, is that something that you had to actively work on, over the years? And if so, what are some tips that you just feel like, okay, is it rereading? What is it sleeping on it? Is it rereading it? How do you really distill things down? Because I think you do such a brilliant job at that.
Thank you. Yes, this is definitely something that I learned over the years and continue to practice today. So, one of the books that I usually recommend to my team members and new hires when they join Maven is Better Business Writing by Harvard Business Review. HBR has a whole set of books that are amazing on a bunch of different topics, but I feel like one thing that we don't talk enough about is how to write with clarity and how to create a strong business case for something. And it's weird because you think like, oh, a tweet thread, like where, this isn't a business case for proposing a project internally or, doing a certain strategy, but there's a lot of the same principles there. And I think one thing that you don't want to do is kind of regurgitate and just recycle what a bunch of other people have already said and stay at a super surface level. I feel like that's very tempting on Twitter because with 280 characters, you don't have a lot of room. And so it's tempting to kind of stay very, very superficial. And I think one way to kind of make your tweet thread stronger is to think about the how, not just the what and the why, but how do you actually accomplish the thing that you might be saying? And really going a couple layers deeper than listicles. So I really think about depth with the threads that I'm writing and which spiky points of view do I have that others might find helpful. And then to your question about, how do you edit so that the writing is clear and crisp? It takes way more effort than most people think. So I will say that, like, I feel like, you read a thread, you're like, oh, like, wow, it feels so easy. It feels, it reads really smoothly. But, really catching and fixing anything that creates mental load for the reader is super important. So anything that creates cognitive friction or cognitive load, really get rid of that. Because when people are reading, especially on a medium like Twitter, they're reading with maybe a tenth of their attention. They're probably watching TV, they're, checking email, they're switching back a bunch, between different platforms. So anything that causes mental friction is a place where they might stop and just drop off. So I really think about how do you remove all the friction, all the things that might be, if someone has to read a sentence twice or three times to really get it, that might be fine in Slack or an email if you're talking to colleagues. But for a stranger on the internet who's not that bought in to continuing to read, you really want to get rid of any bit of friction. So it's very instantly understandable what you're trying to say.
Well, it's easily understandable, and I'm glad Liz brings up this point. It's also really intentional. Like if you only have 240 characters, you better get real intentional with what's going to go in there because you're right. The minute you lose somebody, there's too much for them to consume, they're gone. they're dropped off, they've scrolled, and especially on something like Twitter, that scroll button is so easy to hit. I'm so happy that you brought up spiky point of view, because for anybody that doesn't know this sort of coined term that Wes uses, it is about having a strong opinion on something, not just for the sake of being argumentative or contrarian for the sake of it, but really saying this is my unique viewpoint on this certain subject. And I'm not going to lie, when I first heard about this, my little PR brain or my little marketing mind was immediately like, because I forget what was going on at the time, but someone was being canceled. I mean, someone's always being canceled every other week. It's like Hillary Baldwin or Jussie Smollett, like people are getting canceled left and right. And I thought, spiky point of view. No, if anything, we want to be like vanilla as possible, non-cancelable as possible. And to me, like just hearing that sort of spiky point of view was a little intimidating, quite frankly. So I'm curious, how do you think about spiky points of view, or for someone like me that hears that and thinks, oh gosh, I want to stay vanilla over here, keep that rocky road over there?
Yeah, I think it's very natural to think of spiky points of view as a little bit scary in the beginning. Um, I think that the challenge and the downside of not embracing spiky points of view, though, is that for every person who's a marketer, a consultant, a coach, a designer, a leader, there are so many other people out there, hundreds if not thousands, who have a similar background to you, who have similar work experience, who went to a similar, college. Like, so just standing out, in the sea of sameness is really hard. Especially if you're just saying the same thing as everyone else. So I think that the part about spiky point of view that I think is most interesting is that you're not trying to drop a hot take and do a mic drop for the sake of it. This is the spiky point of view that you have is really rooted in your lived experience, your track record, your work history, the different reps that you've had over the years solving different kinds of problems. So it's not a flighty opinion about something random. It's more something that you've proven to yourself from solving different problems over the years. And it's something where it's defensible. It's not the truth as in like the one sole truth with a capital T, but it's defensible as in like you could explain the rationale and you could give real examples and you can kind of convince someone why this is a better way of doing something than they, what they might otherwise be doing. So I think the fact that you've kind of proven it to yourself and it is a mental model that you use and something that you've kind of learned over the years through that lived experience makes it something where, if you're going to try convincing someone of it, that it's really coming from a place that of deep belief.
Well, and I'm glad that Jeff brings this up about, really taking the courage to post a blog or a newsletter or a tweet that you've sort of been thinking about. I think we all have those sort of subjects that you're like, oh man, I call them dinner party discussions, that when you're at a dinner party, it's like a hill you're willing to die on. But when it comes to publicly saying something in a newsletter, in a tweet, then you're just kind of like, oh, I don't know if I want to like put that out there. What is something that you used or something that kind of made you say, okay, I'm going to take this from these dinner party discussions and I am going to kind of put this out there in a way that is a little more public? Because that's something that I think you do really naturally, but for a lot of people is really intimidating.
Yeah, I love that you asked that because I would describe myself as more of a naturally private person. So I don't consider myself a natural sharer. I have a lot of friends who are natural sharers and they will, have an idea and then tweet it 2 seconds later. Or they'll like draft a thread and then like publish later that day. And for me, I'm just like, okay, like what is it like to live like that? Right? Like, so for me, sleeping on it, reviewing it with fresh eyes, looking at it from different angles, those things all help me feel more comfortable sharing something publicly. So I very much empathize with, with folks out there who are struggling with the same thing because I struggle with that, And so I think the way that I've gotten started sharing and building that muscle so that it does feel easier over time is starting with areas where I feel more confident. So areas like marketing, leadership, course creation, personal branding, communication. So those are all topics where I have tried certain tactics, certain strategies over the years, and I've seen what has worked in the companies that I've worked in, and the clients that I've helped, and customers that I've worked with. So being able to share something that has offered other people value already makes it a little bit less scary. So it feels less like, oh, like this was some, random idea that I'm sharing for the first time. It's like, no, like this is something that has already helped a bunch of people, maybe in smaller group settings, so not publicly. Maybe it's in one-on-one conversations or in, small groups or, internally in different teams. But you already know that it's given some people value. So you know that you're not the only one who found this valuable.
I'm curious, Liz just brought up a good point, which is, echoing what you said, that's a very difficult thing to do. But especially in the professional world where maybe you can feel like, oh, I don't know, how do you bring that to the workplace, or bring those spiky points of view or your whole self to the workplace?
That is a good question. I think the lines between work and personal lives are kind of softening and blending more than they were 10, 20 years ago. I personally usually post spiky points of view about work topics, though. So I think there are a lot of people who will post about personal topics, but for me, there's enough spikiness with work topics that that it's kind of kept me busy for a while. So I think one example is I think that most people overemphasize launches. So product launches, they'll put a ton of effort into planning a launch, but once you throw the confetti in the air and the confetti settles, there's not really much of a plan for, okay, well, what do we do from now until perpetuity, forever, to get a response from our audience or from our customers and kind of feel that same excitement that we feel for launch. So I care more about creating a sustainable plan ongoing for how we're going to drive customer acquisition, for example, not just like how do we plan for a really amazing launch. So like that's one example of a spiky point of view where there are a lot of people who specialize in launches or focus on launches or like put a lot of effort towards them. And so like that is kind of it's a different viewpoint already, and unpacking that and sharing why I think that, so that other people who might be over-indexed on, the launch day or week can think about this other way of thinking about product growth, can embrace that, So I tend to focus more on work spiky points of view.
I'm curious what I already know what my favorite is, but I'm curious what yours is. What is your favorite spiky point of view that you just feel like you could talk about all day? And then I'll tell you what mine is for you.
Ooh,
that
all
you
right.
mentioned. But
Okay,
what's
okay.
your favorite?
Okay, so this is one that I have not shared publicly. So we'll test this one out.
Okay.
I've talked about this in conversation with close friends and colleagues and stuff before, but so the dominant view is that that most skills are transferable from one job to another, right? So if you're switching industries, there's a lot of transferable skills. So I do believe that. And I think I've noticed that there are a lot of skills that aren't as transferable as you might think. That if someone is, let's say someone writes articles or like is great at writing long form articles, you would think that they would be able to write emails to customers, or that they would be able to write website copy, or that they would be able to write tweet threads. But I've worked with a lot of writers, both freelance, in-house, marketers, content creators, and I've been shocked by how skill in one arena, like writing, for example, is actually a bunch of sub types of writing, and that even as specific as someone who is good at writing threads, if you ask them to jot a thread for you or draft something for you, so it's not their own content, they can't do it usually. It takes actually a very specific skill set to be able to put yourself in the mindset of others and like write in their voice, write in their style, absorb their ideas in a way that it kind of becomes your own and you can kind of write as them. So I've just been surprised by how you think like, oh, like you're good at writing, right? Like you should be able to do like these different kinds of writing. And I've been shocked that has not been the case. So that's a little bit spiky because I feel like I don't want it to sound discouraging because it's very encouraging to think like a lot of skills are transferable, and I do agree that they are. But I also think that acknowledging that within a field there are subfields, and just because let's say are good at leading webinars, maybe you're not great if you're recording pre-recorded stuff, teleprompter and seeming really natural. But if they're asked to speak off the cuff, like all of a sudden that medium change or the change in situation, whether it's from live to pre-recorded to text versus video versus audio versus whatever, that medium change throws a lot of people off. And even within the same medium of writing, the different subtypes of writing also can throw people off.
I totally agree with this, by the way. And I also have talked about this in, with friends over dinner or lunches that are also creators on different platforms. And I will offer this analogy to you because I feel like analogies for me are like my love language. Like it's how I communicate to the outside world because I find that it's very easy for people to
love a good analogy.
I was telling a friend the other day that to me, it's like you can have a car mechanic and like, yeah, okay, changing the oil in a Ford might be the same as changing an oil in a Ferrari, which might be the same as an Aston Martin. But at the end of the day, you have different car dealerships who are like, there are people that only work on Ferraris, or there are people that only work on Teslas or only work on Audis. They are all car mechanics. They all technically fix cars, but they have specialties. And it was funny because I was talking to my friend and she was like, I found this writer who's been writing blogs for me, but same thing, exactly like you said. She's like, I tried to get her to write tweets or threads. It went terribly. And we were talking about, you're right. It's a totally different skill set. It's not just like, oh, you're a car mechanic. Why can't you fix my Tesla and my Honda Civic? Like, why can't you do both? It's like, well, that's totally different. So I totally hear you. I appreciate the world premiere of this Spikey point of view because as Jen said, world premiere, I hope we see tweets on this later because I 100% agree with it. I'm curious if some of those people joining us, Liz and Jen and Jeff, if you also agree with something like this because Jen already does. Me too. See, you're in good company, Wes. I'll tell you what my favorite Spikey point of view is. And whenever I read anything that you put out about this topic, I'm like slow clapping in the back. I'm like louder in the back for the people that don't hear it. Managing up. Favorite topic. Managing up. Okay, so I won't spoil it. In your own words, can you share with all of us your Spikey point of view on managing up?
Yes. My Spikey point of view is that most people don't think enough about managing up. And they think that their role in a company, on a team, is to be told what to do. To wait for their boss to say, I would like you to do X by Y date, and I would like it to look like this. And if your boss has to do that, you become instantly less valuable than if you were to do something else, which is to say, here's what I think we should do. And here's why. Here's why I think it'll work. Here's a small way that I can test it and get started today or tomorrow. Here's how I'm going to keep you in the loop. Here's how we're going to measure success. Here's how a couple other competitors or other people have done something similar, how it looked. So you kind of have an idea of the vibe of what you're trying to create. It's really the shift from what should I do? Asking what should I do to here's what I recommend. And that posture of proactiveness of managing up really makes such a difference for your own personal growth, for your relationship with your manager, for your ability to rise up in an organization, to provide more and more value. And I think it really comes down to acknowledging that these days, if someone has to tell you what to do and spell everything out for you, your boss might as well find someone on Fiverr to just do the spec of whatever spec they created, right? We want people who can write specs. Your boss is looking for someone who can assert, here's what that thing could really look like. And half the time too, when you ask your boss a question, they're also thinking about how to figure it out, right? So it's not like your boss just knows the answer and is withholding from you to like not tell you, right? It's like, no, like they're thinking from scratch too, And so you really add a ton more value if you decide to do that thinking from scratch and can give them something to bounce off of.
I love this point from John, whose spiky point of view is that my manager works for me. Wow. You don't hear that very often. That your manager is supposed to provide support, direction, resources, feedback. The only exception is I can't fire them. So if I reach that point, that's when I switch teams or, depart the company. But I love this framework actually. My manager works for me and I'm giving them my ideas and what I think, because here's the thing though, because obviously Wes, you've not only worked on a ton of teams, you yourself have built a ton of teams. So I feel like you see both sides of the coin. When you are looking for new teammates, how do you find that in an interview? Are there certain questions you can ask, or is there like a vibe that you get from people that it's like, okay, you're going to be good at managing up or managing me, or man, you're not going to be so great at that?
Yeah, I think even before the first interview, when you're scheduling the interview or you're kind of going back and forth in the preamble phase before hopping on a call, you can already kind of start to tell how organized and proactive someone is. So I would say that your interactions with a company or with a team that you're applying to start like from the first point of interaction with them. So that's one thing. The other is that I look for people who can turn chaos into order and who naturally are willing to assert what to do and assert shape to something. So if a prompt is kind of open-ended, and your interviewer asks you a question and you don't feel like you have enough to go off of, it's okay to ask follow-up questions, for example, right? Like, so that's the person taking the lead and getting the information that they need. So asking follow-up questions is great. The other thing is making assumptions. So sometimes the interviewer, doesn't want you to ask too many follow-up questions. They want you to kind of go with it. Great. Then state what your assumptions are. So say that I'm assuming this, this, and this, and assuming that success will look like this. So if that's what we're going for, here's how I would go about it. So here are the things that I would do, and here are the trade-offs that I would think about, and here are the options that I would weigh. Here are the positive or negative externalities that might come out of that. Here's what I would recommend. So even if you're not asking questions, you're still asserting, you're moving the ball forward by stating what are those assumptions and how are you piecing things together to shape an idea, as opposed to just thinking like, I don't know, like it's all very ambiguous. Like tell me more so that I can do my job.
And I will also say, even if you don't think you have the exact right recommendation, I always say like the more the merrier, and by the way, this is in my personal life too. Like, don't ask me where I want to eat. Say there's a Mexican restaurant, a Chinese restaurant, or a burger place. Which would you like? And then I can assess that and say
Totally.
burger. Or I can
love
assess
that.
that and say none of those sound good. I don't want any of that. And so I think some people get alarmed that if they don't have the right answer, that they don't even want to bring that to their boss because they already know it's not right. So then they just don't bring anything at all. And then nothing gets brought up.
Yeah, I love that you bring that up. Even giving someone something to bounce ideas off of and to build on is useful. So even if you're, internally at Maven, we call them SFDs, shitty first drafts. If your SFDs are not great, it's still giving your team or your boss or your colleagues something to build on. And a lot of times, like saying burger place, Japanese place, Thai place, whatever, like gives people something to orient around so that they can start to imagine some concrete options. And then they can say like, no, actually it's none of the above. I actually want Italian, And if someone chooses Italian, we're going to keep going food analogy here. If someone chooses Italian, you should not feel bad that you had originally suggested 3 other types of cuisines, right? Because you suggesting those cuisines allowed us to more quickly come to the conclusion that we actually wanted Italian. And we might have still gotten to Italian if you hadn't suggested anything, but it would have taken longer. It would have been more cognitive load on the part of the person who's deciding. So I think it's really important to shift away from thinking that your recommendation has to be adopted for you to feel like it was success. That's not true. If your recommendation was rejected or your proposal, people poked a ton of holes in it, but the team came to a stronger conclusion because of it and has more clarity about the idea and the situation and what we should do and the risks because of it, and we eventually decided not to go with whatever you proposed, that's awesome. That is still a win.
Well, it's a total win. And I always say, if you want to make yourself invaluable on a team, be the idea guy or gal, but be the one who's like, I have an idea for this. It doesn't matter if it's a good idea or the right idea, because often no one wants to be the first one to raise their hand and say, I'll go first. I'm throwing this out here. It could be a terrible idea, poke holes in it, because no one wants to get their ideas, torn to shreds. So then they just kind of shrink and don't say anything at all, which then, to your point, you might as well go get somebody from Fiverr who's just going to do it, who's going to do that for you. But I love the idea of also managing up, because I think it also creates less friction for you in your job. Because I think one of the biggest complaints that I hear from people is, I'm always waiting. I'm waiting on my boss. I'm waiting on my team. I can't do this until this happens. And it's like, well, how are you making it easier for you to get those yes answers? And I know that that's something that you've also talked about in terms of like a yes framework, and even just simply how you're framing questions to other people.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when we're making requests to other people, we think about why them doing the request is good for us, but we don't necessarily think enough about why it's good for them to fulfill that request. So a big part of getting yeses is framing your ideas in ways that benefit the other person. So instead of just saying like, "Oh, could you hop on a customer interview with me because it would really help me do XYZ things. I really need to do this because I blah 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 blah." Like if it's all about I, right? Like the other person's like, "Okay, like I get that this would be doing you a favor, but why is this useful for me?" Right? And so instead, you want to frame requests in a way where the person feels excited to do the thing, that they feel like they would get something out of it too, that they would either learn from you or be able to talk about an idea that they're excited about, to be able to share their thoughts on things where they have, strong opinions about them, that they feel flattered that you want to chat with them because you're modeling your ideal customer based on them. Like, you want to give people reasons to say yes to you. And I think so often when we just shoot off an email, shoot off a Slack message asking someone to do something, we forget that the other person also has a ton of stuff on their plate, also has a ton of competing priorities, has a bunch of other people making requests to them from left and right. And so, why would they want to say yes? We really need to give them that reason.
Well, and I feel like for you also, when I think about how many projects that you've worked on, obviously I rattled off some of those stats when we started, but, over 150 companies and some pretty big names, Seth Godin, Scott Galloway, Morning Brew, et cetera. Your yeses are also really limited. So I'm curious, when you do decide to kind of consult or join one of these teams, whether it's for a long time or a short amount of time, is there some sort of, like through thread that you see that most teams, when you join them, they're missing this, or their team members are not doing that? Like, is there some sort of universal, like, every time I show up to a new place, they're not doing XYZ as best as they could be?
Yeah, I feel like the companies that I consulted with before starting Maven were all pretty competent organizations. So there wasn't anything that like really jumped out. Most people had their shit together. I think the biggest one that I heard from talking to different stakeholders within these different companies is that sometimes their boss wouldn't take their ideas as seriously as they would a consultant's ideas. So, as the consultant coming in, like I would hear that from different stakeholders where it's like, oh yeah, like we had kind of talked about this and the team just like poo-pooed it or like slapped it down. And now like it's back on the table and it's, you're presenting it with a fresh lens, and we really appreciate that because now people are taking it more seriously. So I do think that sometimes you can kind of get stuck in a certain dynamic with your team members, right? Where like an outside voice becomes helpful. But I would say internally, the more that you can treat ideas, the more that you can evaluate ideas for the merit of what the thing is without getting it tangled with who presented it, the better. right? Like you don't really want to
Yes.
need to hire a consultant to be able to hear ideas that your team was already saying. It's great if the consultant is bringing different ideas or advocating for the same idea in a different way that's more persuasive. Fine, like that's value add. But ideally, you want to be able to hear and really see your team members and the things that they're bringing. And so with Maven, for example, even if an idea is for marketing or for instructor success, and it's coming from engineering or it's coming from design, that is valid. Like that's great. Like we love when people from other teams chime in, and same for business side, chiming in on product or chiming in on design. It's if the idea is valid and the critique makes sense, the feedback is good, then the team should take that feedback, even if it came from a source that isn't from within that team.
So important. And it brings me back to, I think we all have this, big goal of like, even the intern can have ideas. Like we all like to say that, like our team is so open, even the intern can have ideas. But sometimes the practice of that isn't quite true. The words are there and everyone can have an idea, but the underlying culture is not quite there. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because when you start implementing that, that's when the changes really start to occur.
Yeah. And I would say that ideas can come from anywhere and anything goes, as long as, and here's a caveat, as long as you make the business case for it. So if you're spewing off random ideas all the time and not thinking very much about it, like that's not that helpful, because you're actually, it sounds like you're being helpful, but you're putting the onus of responsibility on your listeners, the rest of your team, to actually vet the idea and think about how it would work and like whether it's worth doing compared to all the other tactics that we could be doing. So if you are sharing ideas, it doesn't matter where you are in the org, you should give good rationale. It should be logical rationale that makes sense. You should share your thought process. You should be able to point to data, right? It's okay if it's qualitative, So for example, I gave feedback on some designs to our design team, and I pointed out, here's why the middle of the page, it's messy. Like there's too much going on. There's too many font sizes, weights, colors, typography, right? And it doesn't look intentional. For example, there's not enough white space. So someone could argue with that. Someone could push back and say, no, actually, I think there is enough white space. And here are other designs that are similar in dimension or whatever that do work, right? And so we can have that debate because I share the rationale. But if you just say like, that doesn't look good, I hate it, like that's not useful. Like people don't know what to do with that, So you have to share your thought process and then be okay if someone debates you on it.
You have to be ready for the pushback.
Yep.
100%.
Exactly.
Okay, we've reached my whole favorite part of our coffee conversation, which is really just us straight up copying your homework. Like we're just gonna, all the stuff that you've already figured out, that you've already done A++, we're just gonna get our little pens and papers and we're gonna copy it. So are you okay with that?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay. And I will also say, don't worry about everybody scribbling down notes. If you go to sendmenotes.com, we'll send you notes out of all of this. So don't furiously worry about scribbling them all down. So sendmenotes.com, we'll send them to you. No big deal. But Wes, what is something that you have started using or doing lately that you absolutely love and you've been raving about to a ton of people? It can be something specific, like, using an app, or maybe it's you bought a certain product, or doing something that you've been telling everybody else, like you have to get X or you have to start doing Y.
I block off my mornings for deep work. So my meetings start at noon at the earliest, and that's been amazing. So I highly recommend blocking off some chunk of time for deep work. It's okay if it's the evenings for you, if you're, a morning person, you could do the mornings, but not having meetings just happen sporadically all day throughout the day has been really helpful.
And you've trained your team to like not disrupt that time, I assume, as well.
Yeah, I also add it to my calendar. I block it off. So it says like deep work, no meetings. Yeah. So it's useful because if new team members join and they, I haven't had a chance to talk to them about not booking, then they can just come onto my calendar and see that time is blocked and they can book at any other time.
That's good, because if not, they'll sneak in there. They'll weasel their way in and you're like, no, time. Leave me alone. Okay, I have this theory that sort of the old saying was, you are the 5 people that you surround yourself with the most, and that is true. But I think in addition, now that we have these crazy things that we're on all the time, our phones and our iPads and our everything, we are also consuming a lot of content from other humans digitally that we may or may not see every day, but consumption wise, we are consuming a lot of their stuff. So I'm curious if there are specific humans or brands that you follow that you're just like, I love this like I read their stuff or I listen to it or I see it and it just fills me with like light and good thoughts. I love it.
Yeah.
Who are those people?
One is Dr. Becky at Good Inside. She has an Instagram account with over 1 million followers. It's actually parenting advice, and I don't have kids, but I feel like it's great for talking to my inner child. She's a psychologist, yeah, and she talks all about ways to talk more positively to your children. But a lot of the stuff is like, how to not beat yourself up about things, right? Like that.
Yeah.
It's just great for your inner self voice. So I love her stuff. So good. Short videos, really tight, really, really strong content. So I love her stuff. Who else? Deborah Liu, CEO of Ancestry.com, has amazing content on LinkedIn. She also has a Substack. I have no idea how she's able to create such high quality content while literally being CEO of a public company, but her stuff is so good and it's so authentic. Like she posted recently about like growing up and her relationship with her parents, and like how her dad's family wanted boys, but he had 3 girls, and how her dad never made her sisters feel less than. And anyway, just so good. I love Deb's stuff. Definitely check out Deb. I love following people where I feel like I can learn something from about the craft of writing, the craft of storytelling, the craft of narrative and hooking people in and making them feel something. So Deb stuff is great. May Lindstrom is also great. So May used to be a client of mine. So she runs a skincare company. A lot of celebrities use it. Kate Hudson loves one of May's Blue Lagoon balms. But May is one of the best writers that I know. If you check out her Instagram and read her captions, each caption is like a poem. Like it just like hits you in the gut and it just makes you feel, So I love May stuff. And it's skincare too. So like you would think like, how do you write stuff that makes people feel things for skincare? But she does it. So love that. One of my favorite quotes, by the way, is a Picasso quote. And Picasso said, some artists turn the sun into a yellow spot. Other artists turn a spot into the sun. A yellow spot into the sun. And I feel like that is like, you really want to be the kind of person who turns a yellow spot into the sun, right? The opposite is like with the sun into a spot. It's like you get a bunch of resources, a bunch of like, you have everything to work with and you still produce something really mediocre. Like that's not great, Whereas I think, with all the people that I mentioned, the different constraints that they face, the different, regardless of topic matter, they turn, something really small into something that makes people feel and really like has a big impact. So yeah, those people come to mind.
Oh, I love that. I cannot wait to go read these. Okay. As soon as we hang up, I'm going to go stalk that Instagram. Next up. Okay. We love homework. I don't know. We're super nerdy. It's sort of our thing. But if you could give us all a homework assignment for this week, it could be to read a certain book. It could be to subscribe to something. It could be to do something. It could be to listen to something. I don't know. Whatever you think. What would be your homework assignment for all of us this week?
My homework assignment for you would be to share one of your spiky points of view. I think that's a good one. That's a good one. You can either do it as a single tweet, which is, pretty fast, or you can do a thread on it if you want a little bit more room to explain your thinking, explain your thought process. And I would say, to help you narrow it down, choose something that you have taught other people before, that you've mentioned to other people. And, when you mentioned it to them, they thought, oh, like I've never thought about it that way. right? So like something
Yes.
that adds value. It does not need to be, gut punch kind of controversial. It should be something that
Right.
makes them see their problem differently or see their situation differently.
I will also say, please tag Wes and I, whatever medium you choose, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever, so that we can kind of like cheer you on
Yes.
as you
Absolutely.
do your spiky point of view. I
Love it.
love it. Okay, Jeff is in on it. Spiky point of
All
view
right.
incoming. So is
Let's
Jen.
go.
I love it. Okay, now I have to commit to doing mine. Everyone else committing to doing theirs. Okay, so we'll make sure to do that at some point over the next 7 days. Everybody write down the homework assignment because it's coming your way. Wes, where can people keep learning from you, gathering all of your goodness and absorbing it for themselves?
I'm on Twitter at Wes_KO. And my website is wesko.com. I write longer blog articles on some of these threads that I do. And then on Maven at MavenHQ and Maven.com.
Oh, I love it, Wes. Thank you so much for joining us. I really, really appreciate it. This was so much fun and I learned a ton. So thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Kim. This was so fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for hopping in. I'm glad that Chris and Jen and Jeff, everyone's in on the spiky point of view with us. I really appreciate it. We got some great guests coming up in the next few weeks. However, there are some spots where we won't be having our regular coffee sessions because it's summer and you can't have all work and no play. So make sure to check out coffeewithkim.com so you can stay up to date on all of our coffee chats and when we are doing things and what times. You can make sure it's blocked off in your calendar. But I just want to thank everybody for coming in and joining Wes and I. This was so much fun. And I hope everybody has a great long weekend. Sending a big cheers from us to all of you. Thanks, guys.